Hi, Successfuls. It's Kelly here. As solopreneurs, it can be quite a challenge to prioritize tasks and make the most of our time. That's why today's book is so great, because Gary Keller is showing us exactly how to determine the one thing we should focus on first. This is the Success Through Community podcast.
So today we're going to be talking about a book that I have loved for a very, very long time. I noticed that you and I tend to buy, or not buy, but we tend to choose books that we've read in the past that resonated with us, which is great because that's the point here, right?
Yeah.
So the book is The One Thing, The Surprising Truth Behind Extraordinary Results. And you know how passionate I am about this book. And we've talked about it in the past. We've brought it up on Masterminds. I think we even tried it as a book club.
That's right. We did.
And it didn't go through, but we did have like an entire mastermind evening dedicated to this book because I do believe it is important for everybody to read. So it starts, did I give you the title yet? The One Thing? Oh, I did.
Yes, you did.
And it's by Gary Keller. I guess that's kind of important to know who he is. Right at the beginning of the book, it opens up with a Russian proverb. And the proverb is, if you chase two rabbits, you will not catch either one, which we all know is true.
Yes.
Right? Like, we've talked about how violent they can be and how fast they are. So just don't chase any rabbits, people. We don't support that decision. But the reason why I love this book is it's very simple. It's very concise and it gets straight to the point. And the point basically is that there's only one thing that you need to focus on in order to reach your success. I mean, the concept is in the title. It's the one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I am not going to go deep into this book and all of the things it talks about because it talks about a lot of amazing things. What I want to do is talk about what really resonated with me, which was only a very small portion of the book, but it resonated to the point that I cannot stop talking about it. And I basically live my life by it. But okay, this is going to age us again. And I don't know how. Maybe it's because I'm a movie junkie and you are from LA and have been in, the industry, that I keep coming back to movies. And even this book did that. So in the book, he quotes a scene from the movie City Slickers. Did you ever see that movie?
Oh my gosh, I love City Slickers.
Yes. Isn't that great? Good. I'm glad. Okay. I'm not the only aged person here.
No, not at all. And by the way, since we're talking about that I was in the industry and whatever, Billy Crystal is my favorite celebrity interaction that I've ever had.
Really?
So I'll have to tell you that story
surprised.
later. Yeah. He was amazing.
Love him.
Yeah,
okay.
amazing.
I'm going to hold you to that one. So yeah, it is Billy Crystal. And I think it was Jack Palance or Palance. I'm probably saying his name wrong.
Yep.
Jack Palance. So there's one scene in the movie and they quote it very well in the book where Jack and Billy are just roaming the beautiful desert country on their horses and having a talk about what are they talking about? They're talking about the secret of life. And
yes. The one thing.
Jack says, I have the secret of life. And he holds up his finger. And of course, Billy Crystal is like, your finger is the secret. And he's like, no, it's the one thing. And the response is, well, what's the one thing? And he's like, you need to figure that out. And it's so true because there's only one thing holding us back from success. And then when you think about it, and in the book, it basically says it's the one thing is what's important. Everything else doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean squat. And then once you are done with that one thing, then you look at everything else and what's the one thing there, right? So that's what really matters. That's how the book goes. And it talks about, okay, so the first 3 chapters, it really just talks about things like the one thing and the domino effect and then it goes deeper into it. So when you focus on one thing, you're going to knock over that first domino and everything else is just going to fall into place and all the dominoes are going to fall, right? And it talks about how success always leaves little clues for you to know that you're on the right path. And I totally believe that. And how and then if you think of any major corporation, when you think of the world of business, any big company, it was always one person or one thing that shifted it to make it go big. It's never, and yes, as much as it's all the little things that pile up, but it was like the one person that did all those little things, right? So it always comes down to one. And it really, the book goes into all of these things on how to really find your one thing and why the one thing is important. But again, geez, this book is one of those books where we could do a whole season on, or at least I could talk for hours on it. But again, what I want to talk about is why I think the book is a must read and why it is so important. And what truly stood out to me and helped me reach all of my goals, not only as a business owner, but even when I was working corporate. I used this one thing in a job interview when they asked me how do you determine your priorities? I explained this to them, and it got me a management position. And I strongly believe that it got me this management position was this list or this one thing. Basically, within 3 months of being hired in an entry-level position, I jumped by applying this and telling them that I apply this. Because when I told them, I didn't tell them where I got it from. I just said, this is how I do things. And they're like, wow, you're amazing. Right? So,
okay. So can you, you're probably already going to do this, but
yeah,
can you give us for instance, an example? Because I think there's this idea of the one thing. I mean, I read like part of this book, and I sort of feel like, at least my interpretation of it, like it could go different ways, right? Like you could almost take the concept of the one thing and make it similar to like what we talked about with Atomic Habits, where it's like you're focusing on this 1% right now, and then when you achieve that 1%, you focus on the next one, right? So is that what we're talking about, or is this like a bigger one thing that you're working towards? Like, help me understand that.
So it does. In a way, it's both. So I'm going to do you better, as I'm going to tell you how to determine that one thing.
Okay.
And I'm going to put it in the concept of just getting stuff done. That was close. We almost had to have an explicit title there.
Just like your last episode that you were the leading. Yes.
Yes, my mouth is colorful. And I don't wear lipstick. So okay, so yeah, I'm going to do you one better. I'm going to dig down deep into the one thing here on how to do it. So basically the concept is always focus on one thing to move forward. So everybody and every business owner always has a to-do list. And this is more of a prioritizing and being able to focus. So yes, it's going to be the hierarchy. You have a goal and whatever that goal is. And then whenever you have that goal, you're going to break it down to all of the things you need to do to achieve that goal. And then you're going to break it down into tasks, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to start at the simplest form here and go down to those lists of tasks. So basically what we're going to do, and it's so simple, is we're going to apply the Pareto method to tasking. So do you know what the Pareto method is?
I don't think I do. No.
Okay. I think you do. You just don't know its origin. So I can't remember his first name. Little Italian guy. He had discovered that 80% of the land in Italy was actually owned by 20% of the people. Okay.
Okay.
So, and that seems to be what he discovered. And then there was some other guy who worked for GM. They talk about him in the book. I think his name was Durant. I can't remember his name. Anyways, read the book, you'll find out his name. So this guy who worked for GM took that concept and decided to dig a little further. And he was like, not only is 80% of the land owned by 20% of the people, this seems to basically be the law of life of everything. 80% and 20%, that kind of number of unequal distribution, and it was real and it's everywhere. And he started studying it, wrote a book about it, and then it became really popular, and it was proven time and time again, but it became really popular in a book by Richard Koch, who wrote a book called The 80-20 Principle. Now, you've heard of that.
I have heard of that, yes.
Right? So it's basically the minority of your efforts leads to the majority of your results. So you do 20% of the work, 80% of what you want done is going to be done.
Well, and they talk about that a lot in network marketing too, because it's like, 20% of your downline, as it were, brings in 80% of your income. It's the same kind of
Exactly. And
concept.
that's what I'm talking about. So they kept the title the Pareto principle because he's the guy who first noticed it. That was awfully kind of them. But again, it's been proven time and time again. It's in marketing, it's everywhere. It's in land ownership, it's in, the corporate world, what you're gonna do. It is everywhere. But basically, if you don't get hung up on the numbers of 80-20, it's about balance. And that again is something that we always, always, always come back to and talk to. It is about balance. Whatever it is, it's got to reach 100%, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't get hung up on the numbers, but you do come to the, oh, there's a bug on my desk. Yuck. Sorry.
Okay, that might stay. I don't know. We'll see. Keep going.
Even though it's known as the 80-20 rule or principle, it's about oh gosh, I lost my words there. It isn't about the numbers, it's about balance. And then not everything is equal, right?
Right.
So when we are looking at, I feel like I'm teaching a lesson. So when we are looking at, I guess, at the stuff you need to do, not everything on your to-do list is equally important, right?
Oh, this is like task weighting.
Yeah, I don't know what that means, but yeah.
Yeah, no, task weighting is like when you look at the level of effort, like if you're talking about project management, right? And you've got like a list of all of your tasks and things like that of what needs to get done. And then you size them all. There's like a method of doing it by like t-shirt sizes where you have like a large, medium, small, whatever.
Oh, I think we've talked about this. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how you determine like, you can usually do multiple small size tasks within a specific period of time. But when you have a large t-shirt size, it's going to take you a lot longer. So you need to make sure you focus that energy there and don't pretend that you're going to get a bunch of small stuff done when you need to really focus on the big one.
In a sense, yes, but we're not doing it by the size of the task.
Okay.
We're doing it by its importance.
Right. Okay.
So as a small business owner, you and I both know that when you're doing it all yourself and you're a solopreneur, everything that needs to be done is of the utmost importance. And that's where we kind of get lost in the shuffle and get lost in the overwhelming amount of stuff we have to do. Task weighting is definitely going to help because then you can just tick off all these tiny little things and then take the time to focus on the big thing. But what if that big thing is far more important than all those tiny little things? Now you're putting that really important thing on the back burner.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So basically, it's the balance. It's the truth of making sure that you know what is priority and what's not. So that's, and just a side note here, in the book, it talks about the lies we are told and the lies we believe. And that is actually one of the lies, is that everything is of equal importance. And that, again, that's what we tend to think and believe. And that's one of the lies that we fall into. So that's where, the to-do list that you're going to make, your task list, we're going to turn it into a success list. By applying the Pareto's principle.
Got it.
Okay. Makes sense.
I feel like there needs to be like a worksheet that goes along with this episode. Is there a worksheet?
There will be.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Well, more of a diagram than a worksheet because
okay.
I cannot determine what's important in your business, just like you can.
Sure,
right?
Sure.
Yeah. But the concept is simple. What you're going to do is you grab a pen and paper or whatever application you use to list all your tasks that need to be done. Do a big brain dump and list them all. Whether it's 5 things or 25 things, they go on the list. And then this is when you're going to apply Pareto's principle to it and look at your list. And out of everything on there, what should you be doing? What is important? I don't care about the size of the task. I don't care about how many little itty bitty things you need to do to accomplish this one task, but what is the one important task you're going to do? For example, you have a long list of creating new content, writing a blog, doing your social media, and creating a new program that you promised a client. So, out of those 4 things, what's the most important thing? Obviously, it's going to be your client.
Right.
But that is also the heaviest thing that has to be done.
True.
Right. So that's why you kind of go through that list and decide what you should be doing. And again, you don't get hung up on the numbers, but you're going to grab at least 20% of that list and put it into like the should pile. Because, and when I say don't get hung up on the numbers, I don't want you to have a list of 32 things and then go and grab your calculator and determine what's 20% of 32. Like that is just getting too deep into avoidance and procrastination, if you ask me.
So it's not that
But
exact. It's kind of more of like a gut instinct.
yeah, exactly. Trust your gut. Go through it, and out of like those 32 items, what should you be doing? Grab 5, grab 6 of those items that are of high priority, what you should be focusing on right now. And now your to-do list has been dwindled down to maybe 5 or 6 things. It's no longer this giant brain dump of everything that you have to done and get done, and it's no longer weighing on you. And then out of those 5 that you have remaining, this is when you're going to go even further down the Parato's rabbit hole and take those 5 and what should you be doing out of those 5? What is the top priority of those 5? And then,
so you
20%
keep
of 5
applying
is
that 80-20,
Yep.
80-20 until you get down to 1.
You get extremely deep down until you get to 1. And then when you are accomplished that 1, whether it takes 5 minutes or 5 days, you revisit your list again and you go back. So now that list of 5 is a list of 4. But take a minute to see on that, and as you're working the list backwards, when you accomplish that one task, that one that was of the utmost priority, how did it shift all of the priorities and that long list of 32? Because it probably knocked off a few things off that list. And that's usually what kind of happens.
Well, hang on. So how? Because they were subtasks of that thing?
Generally, that's what ends up happening.
Okay.
Yes. But when you work backwards and you do that one important task, you focus on the one thing and it is accomplished and it is done. Now your last list of 5 things that you've dwindled down to 1 is down to 4. And if they are all still of the utmost priority, then you just grab the one thing you should be doing and go from there. And you just basically work your to-do list backwards that way on checking it off the box. It's like rinse and repeat to accomplish what really needs to be done.
Gotcha. So it is, in that respect, it is a lot like the 1% because
yes,
it's just focusing in on how to get to what is that 1%, because it's all well and good to say improve by 1%, but what does that mean exactly? You need to have a method to get to that 1%.
Exactly. And
maybe I should have finished this book.
I know. I never even went down to the thought of the 1% with Atomic Habits. It's so connected and it's so true, because the thing is to bring your focus down. And when you're doing that 1% of habit tracking and getting into good habits with those atomic micro habits, it is going small. And that's like one of the main principles of this book is it's going small. Don't focus on being busy. Don't focus on getting the big things done. Don't focus on being productive. Just focus on the one thing that's going to move you forward, because nothing else matters. Focus on the one thing.
I'm actually kind of surprised that James didn't reference this book. Because it not that he talked about this and didn't give credit, because he certainly didn't do that, but like it would seem like it would have been good reference material for what he was talking about.
Good connection. I don't know when this one was published.
I'm sure it was before, because Atomic Habits is older, but not like that old. I want to say it's like maybe 2018 or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was 2017. The one thing, 2001.
Yeah, so that's what I figured.
So it's kind of older.
Interesting.
But the thing is if you think about it and you look at history, everything kind of dwindled down to the one thing, right? So I'm not going to give you really good examples because I'm running on no sleep. But
ditto. Okay. So this will be a great episode.
See, I was like, that war where the one thing that won it was the Battle of Waterloo. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but that's the one thing.
Oh, the sad thing is I would probably follow that thought train right about now.
But like when you think of say Apple, when everyone thinks of Apple, what's the one thing that comes to mind? Steve Jobs.
Well,
He's
funny
that
thing is, I
one
would
thing.
say innovation because I've been reading Simon Sinek.
Ah,
So,
there you go.
I mean, same thing though, right? Because innovation was only really such a thing at Apple because of Steve Jobs. So it's kind of the
Because
same thing.
he brought it into play, right?
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was the one that was like,
He
let's
was
do
the
it this
one
way.
thing.
Let's do it that way. He was the one thing. So the one thing isn't necessarily a single task. It could be a giant task, like creating, as I mentioned earlier, creating a new program for a specific client. Like that is a lot of menial tasks and a lot of things that you need to do.
Yes, it
It's
is.
not just one thing, but in essence, it's the one thing you need to focus on is accomplishing that program and getting it done, be able to move forward. That way you move forward, your client move forward, everybody moves forward, and we are all on the happy forward train.
So then this actually is something that I should probably talk about more in my business because as you're saying that, I'm realizing that yeah, okay, yes, you want to be focusing on that one thing. Excuse me, that one thing which is ultimately a growth thing, I would assume.
Mm-hmm.
What that means though is that you can't be manually focusing so much on all the day-to-day things because if you are, then you don't have any space left for the one thing.
For the one
So
thing, yeah.
that's where like automation and a process and systems come into play because you need to have those things in place so that you can take that off your plate to an extent. I mean, obviously you can't literally automate everything. You have to be somewhat involved in all of that. But once
Right.
you've automated it to that degree, it gives you the space,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to focus on that one thing.
See, exactly. And when you start talking about like looking at the tasks of all the things that you have to do as a business owner, one of them is to create a email system, that an auto reply system, and you're still going to have to do all of these things, but that focus, the one thing is getting it set up so that you just have to write the content and hit send, and you don't have to worry about it responding to like a funnel for sales, and the email goes out and delivers the product. If you had to do that with every time someone purchased one of your courses, to respond to it, to run what, let's go in sequence here. They buy the course, you have to run their credit card and accept their payment. You have to send them a thank you email with an invoice. You also have to send them a big welcome email and show your appreciation and provide them with what they purchased.
Yeah.
And then in a perfect world, all of the good business owners are doing a follow-up. And they're like, hey, I'm just checking in to make sure everything worked out the way it was supposed to. If you have any questions, hey, maybe you might be interested in this and possibly do a little bit of an upsell. Like these are all things that if you had to do this manually for each and every single client you have, you need a team. Like,
Yeah.
and that's just not, that's retail, for crying out loud. And nobody wants to do that. That's why
Well,
we're all
and
self-employed.
exactly. But let's even take that a step further because like you could argue, well, the number of sales may not be as high, but let's go all the way back to like the opt-ins because a lot
Mm-hmm.
of us get a lot more opt-ins than we do sales, right? I mean, that's
Yep.
kind of how
How it works.
how statistics work. So like when you get those opt-ins, you need to not only give that instant gratification for whatever they opted in for, but then also that's where the drip funnel comes into play because most people aren't going to go from an opt-in to a purchase immediately. Like that's
Exactly.
just
Yep.
not how we work.
Yep.
So being able to kind of stay in connection with that person and, I hate to use the term nurture, but that's kind of
Yep.
what it
What you're
is,
doing.
where
Yep.
you're just staying in connection and keeping them educated and informed and hopefully a little entertained so that they become a customer. And then, you kind of lather, rinse, repeat with that, right?
Exactly. Like it's one of those things where when it comes down to the one thing, you need to be able to, and we all talk about it, you're going to connect with your clients. And yes, that is the ultimate goal, is to have that connection. But the automation right there with all of that would be the one thing you want to focus on to get started. Because
Yeah.
once that is in play and you have that one thing, that automation set up and good to go, you don't have to think about it. And now you can go on to the next thing that you should be doing. And that is creating those relationships.
Right.
So
Well, it even
right?
gives you
So
the space to do that, right? Because think about how
exactly.
many of those initial leads that come through are kind of bogus to begin with.
Hmm.
Like either they're fake to begin with, they're not an actual person, it's like a bot or some weird thing like that. Or it's just somebody who was always just going to come in for your opt-in and peace out, right?
And
So
there
if
are more of those than anything else,
oh,
right?
for sure, for sure. So if you have to spend that amount of energy interacting with each and every one of those false leads, then you have no space for your customers who actually matter.
Who actually matter. Exactly. And that's why the concept of this book, and yes, you need to read this book.
Yeah,
I
I think I
do
do.
really
Dang
think
it.
that you will get into it because you have the same kind of wavelength as I do when it comes down to prioritizing and making sure. Like you and I are so different. We are balanced. Oh boy, girl, we are balanced. But
It's the reason we work well together because, yeah, definitely
yeah.
balanced.
So, but the thing is there are so many things that we align with. And I do believe that simplicity and making things easier and work for you is one of those things where we align. And the concept that success doesn't happen overnight, we both agree that that doesn't happen. It happens over time, and it actually happens sequentially. It's
Hmm.
one thing at a time. And again, that's where I was mentioning earlier that success leaves clues. Whereas at one thing at a time, you're just going to notice this went right, and this is going right, and now this is going right, and you're going to move forward, and you're going to reach that success that is what you determine as success. And you're only going to do that by getting one thing done at a time, whether it's creating content or working with clients or creating that automation to bring in that email list to grow, to reach out. And I just hit the mic, I hope I didn't pop y'all, but
No,
to
no, it
be
wasn't
able
bad.
to reach out to everybody on your list. Because if you're spending all that time on the signups, you're not going to be able to genuinely connect with those who want to hear from you.
Right. No, that's so true. I mean, that's just one example. Obviously, there's so many more, but
So many
that's a very
more.
relatable one to me because that's where my brain goes.
Exactly. And it's just, I don't know. I don't know. This book, it narrows down to the most important number by far is one. It's simple. It's just how you get there, and it's knowing your priorities. And the one thing that see what I did there?
But
One of the things that I absolutely loved about the book was it gets straight to the point. There's no fluff. There's no when I was doing this and doing that, and then I had to do this and do that. It does tell a little bit of background story on specific people who really drive through the point, like Steve Jobs, of the one thing, but there's no fluff. It's just straight to the point. This is what's important. This is why it's important. And this is how you apply it. And again, I am only talking about one itty bitty chapter, one itty bitty piece of this book.
yeah,
So, and that is just the creating your success list. So that is just prioritizing your tasks. And he goes into applying this to everything and why it's important. One of the parts in the book, I think it was called, it's just called The Lies. And I mentioned that earlier. And one of the
hmm
lies is we look at everything as everything is important. And we have been, I don't even know the word, like it's been drilled into us through media, through society, through schools, through work, through even just commercials on TV, that we have to be everything and everything is important.
yeah,
And that
totally
isn't
bogus.
true. Yeah. So as a human, you have to realize that you need to know your priorities. As a solopreneur, it is important to know this for your business just to be sustainable.
As somebody who, like, I mean, this is true just in your own task prioritization. I'm saying that
Mhm.
slow because it's a tricky word. Um, it's important in that, but like as someone who, like in the corporate world, has been, on the receiving end of like IT tickets and, bugs and things like that, if everything is marked urgent, it essentially negates the urgency because
It really does.
they can't all be urgent. It's impossible. If you're only one person or even a small team, you can't possibly prioritize everything. It is not physically possible.
No. And
So,
even
yeah.
if you try to delegate, this is important. It's of the utmost importance. I want you to do it. This is of the utmost importance. I want you to do it. You're still too scattered,
Yeah.
right? Because the one person that needs to get to the end goal, everything is muddled because
Well, it all
not
needs to
everything
be
is really
working
important.
together, right? Like,
Exactly.
so really, once you know what that one thing is, see, this is interesting because it's kind of feeding into a concept from the Infinite Game, which will be a future episode because one of the things he talks about is like the ultimate goal. It's a very corporate book, so we'll get into that next time. But
Yes.
like it's all about everybody working towards a single goal.
Hmm.
And like that's what you're talking about here, basically, is that even if you have a team or you have consultants or a VA or whatever it might be, that delegation is not taking, a totally unrelated important thing and giving it to someone else to do while you focus on this. It should be
Yes.
delegating some of the smaller tasks of that one thing so that as a group, you can make that one thing happen faster.
Exactly. And it's breaking it down, right, to that success list, which
Yeah.
it's going through and finding out what you should be doing opposed to what you think you need to do or what needs to be done in general. It's that prioritization. And we talk about it a lot. But I think one of the things that we need to be very clear on here, and the book is very clear on it, is if you do not have the clarity to find that one thing, then you're going to be a mess. You're not going to be able to move forward because you're going to be bouncing off the walls and jumping all over the place. So clarity is really important, and bringing down and focusing on and finding what that one thing is. And you got to remember too, is that one thing is always going to change. I
Right.
mean, I talked about creating a success list and just doing your tasks. So when we are looking at the to-do list, go shopping, that's a priority because there's no food in the house. So yeah, top notch. When we're talking about things like that, that is one thing that,
Right.
yeah, is a part of your life, but it isn't the end all. It's always going to change. It's going to change as your business grows and changes. It's going to change as you as a business owner grow and change. Your life is going to change. And the book kind of goes into that on it goes digs deep into those lies that I was talking about
Mm-hmm.
on what we believe is truth, like multitasking. And we all know that person who can't get anything done unless they're doing multiple things at the same time.
Yeah.
But really, that's a mindset. I don't believe multitasking is a thing because you can't focus on,
It's a
you know,
thing. It's just not something people are actually good at.
yeah, and the humans are not meant to do that, right?
Right. Right.
So you're not going to catch both rabbits. Hello. It's just that's how it works.
You know, it's funny because I sort of can feel, I mean, track with me for a second. Tell me if I'm like off base or if this relates in your mind for you. But like we talked about the story brand before,
Mhm.
and how not only can you be writing your brand story for your entire business, but like you could write a brand story for a particular course or product or whatever that you're putting out there.
Mhm.
So to an extent, I feel like you could almost kick off this success list with a brand story.
I
So
think,
like, you know what I'm saying? Like
yeah.
if you're trying to figure out like, okay, I need to determine which of these new course ideas or which of these new product ideas is the one thing I need to focus on right now. So you
Mhm.
write your brand story for what your customer needs right now. And that would help, I would think, feeding into looking at that success list and determining, okay, well, which of these things on this list most accomplishes this brand story. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. So if you're creating and you want to sell this product, and let's say it's already created, but and you believe in it and you know what it is, whether it's a course or a book, whatever. The thing is the focus now is no longer creating it. That's no longer the one thing. The one thing is getting it out there. And how you're going to get it out there, creating a brand story for it.
Yeah.
Because giving it its own identity, and it's going to be able to make it that much easier for you to get it out there, right? So I really do believe that doing that and having that go down your should list when you're looking at the whole concept of marketing, whatever it is you just created, when you start breaking down that list, that's going to be on there, and that's going to be a high priority.
Yeah.
So you
Oh, I
got
like that.
so you got the whole big list of things you need to do, and then you find like the real most valuable player. What's the most important thing? And it's creating the brand for that product. But the biggie thing is giving it its brand story. So that, again, it's 100 little tasks you have to do, but it's a lot easier when you know that you're going to get this one thing, this
Yeah.
one big priority done. So
Well, and I gotta say, like, if you're talking about like the way you're explaining it right now, if I just recently launched something that I did not follow this path of creating a brand story for that particular product. And the more I'm thinking about it, I kind of wish I had, because if I had created a brand story for that specific system, how much easier would it have been writing the copy for my landing page, writing
oh
the sales
man,
funnel emails? You know what I'm saying? Like, because
yeah,
you would already, when you do the work of the brand story, you would already kind of be figuring out some of the verbiage that you'd be using, and you would know what aspects to really hone in on. I kind of did it
absolutely.
backwards. You know what I mean?
And that's what we tend to do,
Yeah.
because we look at it as everything weighs the same. They're all super important. It all has to be done. And then we fall out of doing it in an order that's going to make the most sense and make our lives that much easier. Now, and this is where I was talking about how once you start breaking down your success list and you focus on that one thing, and then you revisit your success list again, and a bunch of things are going to be knocked off that task list, that is a perfect example, because you have this giant brainstorm of list of things that you need to do to promote this new system that you've created, and writing its copy is going to be on that list. All the sales copy, all the email copy, all of the the blog
Ad
copy,
copy. Yeah.
all the copy is going to be on that list. But when you go into your 20%, I should do this, break it down, 20%, I should do that, 20%, I should do this, and you're down to the one thing, and that one thing is write a brand story for this particular program or this system. In that brand story, you just basically rewrote half of your copy.
Right.
Right. So now that
Yeah.
huge list is not as daunting, because you went tick, tick, tickety boo without even noticing that now that big list, because you focus on the one thing that was actually the priority. It was the most valuable thing in the list to be done. It just didn't seem to be
Right.
when
Right.
you
It was
look
the
at it as a giant
messaging,
list.
basically. You just,
Exactly.
yeah, no, yeah. Okay, now you're blowing my mind and I have to read this book. Dang it.
Yay. It is a
And the
good
funny
morning
thing
after
is,
all.
like, I did start reading this book when we tried to do
Yeah.
it for the book club. I just didn't get into it. And I wonder if it's like, I don't know, sometimes it's just the style of writing. I mean, sometimes it's just the timing of when you're trying to read
True.
something and it's just like you just don't have the mental capacity for it at that moment. But
Or the
sometimes it's,
interest.
or the
When
interest.
yeah.
Yeah, but sometimes it's also the style of writing, because a lot of
Yeah.
these business books, especially some of the older ones, are kind of dry. And
Oh, yeah.
so they don't always, grab your attention and inspire
Mhm.
you in the same way. And if, I hate to say it, but like if it doesn't do that within the first couple of pages, or like I'll say chapter, let's be generous and say chapter, then like it's a lot harder for me to push forward and finish reading it.
Oh, exactly. I
Part of one
can.
of the reasons I love doing this podcast with you, because when I pick a book like that, excuse me, when I pick a book like that, it kind of forces me to finish it, or at least finish
Mhm.
it enough to be able to talk about it intelligently. You know what I
Absolutely.
mean?
Yep. It forces you to actually pay much more attention to what you're consuming.
Yeah.
And when we were doing it as a book club, it was one of those things where at this point, it's not a book you would have picked up on the shelf regardless. It has a very bland and boring cover.
It
And
does. I do remember that.
yeah, and the book is written so much that it's like how he talks. I can read this book and think this is how he's going to speak to me at the dinner table.
Hmm.
It's not. It definitely is not blue ocean strategy. I mean, it is definitely not, you know, very. You don't need a dictionary to read this book by any means. Okay.
Right.
But I think it's also, like you said, timing. If you are not interested in trying to figure out how to better prioritize everything and move forward in a sense that this is almost this one itty bitty little section is just about, creating that task list, that success list, then you're not going to get into it and you're going to step away from it. It's like me picking up a romance novel during Halloween. It doesn't work. Not going to happen.
Well, I also feel like I might have been reading Atomic Habits around the same time that we tried to do this. And so I could very easily see myself feeling like, at least at the beginning of the book, like either this was going to, I don't want to say conflict, because as we're talking about it, it doesn't conflict at all with the strategy, but it may have felt that way to me in the time. And I think when I really click into a particular strategy, I try not to multitask on strategies because it's hard to do. But like the more that you talk about it, at least in this one chapter, it's not conflicting at all. If anything, it reinforces. So, yeah, maybe I just never let myself get far enough to really get to that
and that's
realization.
Understandable, right?
I
have way too many books that I have set aside and went another day, day, and then went back to it, a year later and went, why didn't I finish this?
Right. Like, oh my gosh, this is life-changing. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So what for me, and this tiny itty bitty little section and the whole book as a whole, basically, what's the one thing that you can do right now or should do right now that will make everything else easier or even unnecessary? So it's just, it comes down to simplifying your life, which I know you are 100% on board with.
Yeah.
And it comes down to having the clarity and and being able to prioritize. So again, it doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be overthought. It's just create that brainstorm. Create that brainstorm, write down your to-do list, grab 20% of that and think, what should I be doing? Grab 20% of that and think, what should I be doing? I know I'm repeating myself. I sound like a broken record. And keep going down the 20% rabbit hole until you have that one very important priority that needs to be done. And then just watch everything come together. And it's one of those things where, you don't really apply this as much in life, or I hadn't in life as I did in business. And as I did when I was working corporate, because when you're working corporate and you want to impress the bigwigs, it's by getting what's important, and your prioritizing when you're down at the bottom of the ladder is definitely going to be really different from what the management team's prioritizing is. But realizing that their one thing is a little bit bigger and a little bit heavier than your one thing. If you can knock off that big heavy thing, they're going to notice, and so are your clients. So it's just, that's the way it works, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it kind of plays in. I mean, if we're talking about in the corporate world, the way you're describing, this plays into like OKRs, right? When you're in the objectives and key results, when you're talking about goal setting and then performance reviews and whatnot. Typically, at least in a good corporate situation, that starts from the top down, right?
Yeah.
The top people write their OKRs, and then it goes down to the next level. They take those OKRs and create their own for their team, and then down and down and down. So that, I mean, basically we're all working towards the one thing, right? I mean, that's essentially what that process is doing. And
what's that, like that small focus, right? It's narrowing down and thinking small in order to accomplish the big picture.
If you guys want to connect with us on social media, Jolene, do you want to tell them how they can do that?
Sure. You can follow us on Instagram at Success Through Community, or join our free or paid communities over at Patreon, which is patreon.com/STC Productions.
The best way that you can support the podcast is to make sure that you are subscribed wherever you're listening and leave us a review. That's the only way that new people will find and join our community. The Success Through Community podcast is hosted by Kelly Gable and Jolene Mills and all episodes are solely the opinions of the respective host. Our sound production and editing is done by Kelly Gable, and all visual creative, including our logo, was created by Jolene Mills. The Success Through Community podcast is an STC production.